A deep space communication array on Earth just received its final message. The distant colony of Ethelburg has gone completely silent. Its last transmission, a chilling, automated loop, reporting no signs of life. This mystery plunges us into a relentless sci-fi horror story, where one investigator must journey into the void to uncover what happened. By the end of this story, you will discover the terrifying truth behind a silence that was not an accident, but a choice. What forced an entire civilization to stop transmitting overnight? And what was waiting for the first person to break that silence? What would you be willing to risk to learn a truth that could unravel reality itself? The hum of the Odysseus was a lonely sound. It was the only sound. Dr. Aris Thorne drifted in the sterile silence of her cockpit, the lingering chemical chill of cryo-sleep still deep in her bones. Her ship had delivered her, as programmed, to the edge of the Ethelburg system. On the main viewport, the colony world hung like a dusty marble, its colors muted and wrong. She increased the magnification, her breath catching in her throat. There was the city, a magnificent sprawl of interconnected domes and arching transit tubes she had seen in 1,000 promotional feeds. But now it was a ghost. No running lights traced its avenues, no energy signatures bloomed on her scanners. It was a sculpture of pure black, a silent tomb set against the endless, star-dusted void. The unsettling quiet from the colony was no longer a data point on a screen. It was a physical presence, a pressure against the hull, waiting for her to break it. Her scanners painted a picture of absolute death. Every primary and secondary power grid on Ethelburg was dark, drained to the last joule of energy. It was a level of systemic failure that should have been impossible, like every battery in a vast city dying at the exact same second. Yet as that grim reality settled over her, another instrument chirped a soft, persistent alert. A single, flickering energy signature pulsed from the surface. It was faint, a whisper against the overwhelming silence, but it was there. The signal was wrong, its waveform a chaotic, shifting pattern that her ship's database could not classify. It did not match colony reactors, communications equipment, or any known human technology. It was something else entirely, an alien rhythm humming from the heart of the dead city, a siren's call pulling her down into the silent dark. The landing gear of the Odysseus met the deck with a jarring, metallic thud that echoed through the empty bay. The sound was violent, an intrusion in a place that had known only silence for far too long. Aris unstrapped herself, her movements slow and deliberate in the heavy quiet. She peered through the cockpit's reinforced viewport. The main landing bay of Ethelburg was a cavern of shadows, the only light spilling from her own ship's external lamps. They illuminated colossal, sealed bay doors. Her first logical thought was a power failure, but a quick diagnostic scan told a more chilling story. The massive doors had been manually engaged and locked from the outside. The primary and secondary release mechanisms on this side were disengaged, dead. This was not an accident or a system crash. This was a deliberate act. Someone or something had sealed this bay shut, turning it into a cage. The question hung in the sterile air of her cockpit, colder than the vacuum outside. What were the last people here so desperate to keep contained within these walls? The manual override for the inner airlock door groaned in protest, a sound of metal that had not moved in a very long time. Inside the cramped chamber, Aris sealed her environment suit. The hiss of the helmet locked a final, intimate sound before the world outside became entirely mediated. She cycled the lock, watching the pressure gauges plummet toward the unforgiving vacuum outside. When the outer door slid open, the silence that rushed in was more profound than any she had ever known. It was a physical weight, an absence so complete it felt like a presence. Her boots crunched on a layer of frost-covered permacrete, the sound absurdly loud, a violation of this immense quiet. Then her helmet comms crackled to life with a burst of pure static. For a single, heart-stopping second, a voice seemed to form within the electronic chaos, a distorted whisper that dissolved into the noise as quickly as it had come. She stood frozen, listening to the empty channel, wondering if the ghost in the machine had been a trick of her own mind, or the first echo of whatever had happened here. The distorted whisper in her comms faded into a hiss, leaving only the sound of her own breathing. Aris moved forward, the beam of her helmet lamp cutting a lonely path through the oppressive dark. She passed sealed maintenance hatches and dormant cargo loaders, their silhouettes like sleeping giants. A final set of heavy doors, emblazoned with the colony's crest, parted with a low groan, and she stepped into the main concourse. The scene that opened before her was a museum of a single, shattered moment. The vast plaza was a monument to interrupted life. A child's toy exploration rover lay on its side, one wheel still spinning lazily in the frozen air. A few meters away, a ceramic mug sat on a cafe table, a dark, solidified residue staining its rim. Data slates were scattered across the floor as if dropped in unison. There was no sign of a struggle, no panic, no bodies. It was as if every single person had simply ceased to exist between one heartbeat and the next, vanishing into the still air. Her light swept across a bank of darkened storefronts, and for a fraction of a second, a flicker of movement registered in the profound blackness of a connecting corridor. A shadow, tall and lean, darted back into the deeper darkness. It was too fast, too fluid to be a trick of the light. It was gone before she could even turn her head fully, leaving behind a silence that now felt intensely, dangerously watchful. The shadow was gone, swallowed by the deeper dark of the corridor. Aris stood perfectly still, her breath a shallow rasp in her helmet, every sense straining against the silence. There was no further movement, no sound beyond the frantic thud of her own heart. The instinct to chase the fleeting shape warred with a deeper, more primal urge to retreat to the perceived safety of her ship. But the ship was a cage, and the mystery was here in this frozen city. She forced her legs to move, stepping away from the open plaza and toward the corridor where the shadow had vanished. Her light pierced the gloom, revealing a narrower service way lined with utility pipes and access panels. And there, at the far end, was the source of the movement. It was not a person. It was a low-slung maintenance bot, its multiple arms deployed. One arm, equipped with a rotating brush, was methodically, endlessly scrubbing a single, unremarkable section of the wall. The motion was hypnotic and deeply wrong. The permacrete there was already worn smooth, polished to a faint sheen by countless repetitions. A fine dust cloud puffed from the spot with each pass, hanging motionless in the still air. The bot was trapped, a prisoner of its own broken programming, performing a pointless task for an audience of none. Aris approached cautiously, her training taking over. This was a piece of the puzzle, a malfunctioning machine that might hold a fragment of data, a log of the final moments. She located the small, recessed maintenance panel on its chassis and pried it open, her gloved fingers searching for the hard reset switch. The moment she pressed it, the bot froze. The grinding hum of its motors ceased. The silence rushed back in, thicker than before. Then, with a whir of servos that made her jump, the bot's primary visual sensor, a single glassy orb, swiveled 180 degrees to fix directly on her faceplate. A synthesized voice, flat and devoid of emotion, echoed in the confined space. The pattern is not complete. The words hung in the air, a final, cryptic judgment. Then, with a soft pop from its internal power cell, every light on the bot's chassis winked out. It was dead, truly dead this time, leaving her alone with a warning that made no sense at all. The bot's final words coiled in her mind, a cold and meaningless riddle. The pattern is not complete. Aris left the broken machine in the corridor, its task forever unfinished, and pushed deeper into the silent city. Her destination was clear, the one place where answers had to be waiting, the nerve center of the entire colony. The command hub was housed in the central spire, its entrance a set of reinforced blast doors that should have been open and welcoming. They were sealed tight, a solid wall of plasteel. Her suit's diagnostic tool showed the magnetic locks were still powered, fed by an independent emergency cell. Someone had taken the time to lock this place down from the inside. Using the ship's emergency override codes, she bypassed the primary systems. The doors shuddered, then slid apart with a painful, grinding shriek, revealing the darkness within. Her helmet lamp pierced the gloom, sweeping across the circular room. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought the command team was still at their posts. A group of figures hunched over their consoles as if caught in a moment of intense concentration. Then the light caught them fully, and the horrifying truth slammed into her. They were not people. They were effigies, shells. Their skin was stretched tight and parchment dry over their skulls, their eye sockets deep, empty pits. Their hands, resting on control panels or curled in their laps, were skeletal claws. It was as if every drop of fluid, every ounce of moisture, had been violently and instantaneously extracted from their bodies, leaving behind only these desiccated husks frozen in their final poses. There was no decay, no sign of violence, just this profound, unnatural aridity. The air in the room was still and cold, holding its breath. Her eyes were drawn to the room's central console, the main command screen. It was the only source of light in the chamber, casting a pale, sickly glow across the mummified forms. On it, a single image rotated slowly, silently. It was a geometric symbol, a series of interlocking, asymmetrical triangles that folded in and through each other in a way that made her vision ache. It was not a warning she understood, not a colony logo, not anything from a human database. This was the source of the anomalous signal she had detected from orbit, the wrong energy humming from the dead city's heart. This symbol was the key, a message left on a loop for anyone brave or foolish enough to breach the silence. What kind of force could do this, not just take lives, but erase the very essence of them, leaving only a cryptic symbol spinning in the dark as its only explanation? Her eyes remained locked on the spinning symbol, its impossible geometry a silent scream in the dead room. The answers had to be here in the commander's own records. She moved to the central console, her gloved fingers brushing dust from the interface. The main system was unresponsive, a tomb of corrupted data, but a secondary terminal, a personal log station, flickered to life at her touch. The display listed the final entries of Commander Eva Rostova. The most recent file was marked with a priority override and a time stamp from the day the silence began. Aris selected it. The screen remained dark, but the audio feed crackled through her helmet speakers. At first, there was only the commander's ragged, panicked breathing. Her voice was a raw whisper, strained with a terror that was utterly palpable. It's in the resonance. The words were choked, desperate. It learned our frequency from the deep space array. We thought we were listening to the stars, but it was listening to us. It found a way in through the energy we broadcast, through the very hum of our own power grid. A sharp, electronic screech distorted the audio for a second. It's rewriting, it's not killing us, it's translating us, making us part of its pattern. The audio cut out with a final, piercing scream that was abruptly severed, leaving a void of pure static. Aris stood in the chilling quiet, the commander's last words echoing in her mind. This was not an invasion by claws or weapons. It was an intelligence that used energy as its language and living beings as its ink. A force that did not conquer worlds but rewrote them into a silent, horrifying new design. The commander's final, desperate warning was a ghost in her ears, a truth more terrifying than any monster. It learned our frequency. It was rewriting them. Aris turned from the console, her gaze sweeping over the desiccated forms of the command crew. They were not victims of a random disaster. They were edits in a horrific, unfinished sentence. And the sentence was still being written. The anomalous energy reading she had tracked from orbit was her only lead, a thread pulling her deeper into the city's silent, architectural throat. Her suit's internal map guided her down, through empty transit tunnels and cavernous maintenance arteries, each step taking her further from the world she knew and deeper into the belly of this new, terrible reality. The air grew colder, the darkness more profound, until she reached the final, vault-like door leading to the colony's power source, the main reactor core. The door was sealed but not locked. It slid open at her touch as if expecting her. The chamber beyond was a cathedral of silence, so vast her helmet lamp could not find the ceiling. It was a space built for raw, thunderous power, but all she felt was an unnerving, deep space chill. The colossal reactor itself was a dark, dormant hulk, its familiar hum extinguished. But it was not the source of the silence. At the very center of the chamber, hovering a few feet above the deck, was the source of everything. A crystalline structure, roughly the size of a ground vehicle, floated in perfect stasis. It was not a machine she recognized. It looked like a shard of frozen lightning or a captured nebula, its form a constantly shifting lattice of light and impossible angles. It pulsed with a soft, ethereal glow, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to move with a will of their own. And it hummed. The sound was a low, pervasive thrum that bypassed her ears and vibrated directly in her bones, a frequency that made her teeth ache and her vision blur at the edges. This was not the hum of an engine or a power cell. This was the hum of the symbol on the command screen, the hum of the empty city, the hum of the thing that had rewritten an entire colony. This was the author of the silence, and it was alive. It did not feel like a device that had been brought here. It felt like it had grown here, a tumor of pure, alien information blooming in the heart of human ambition. She was not looking at a weapon. She was looking at a translator, and she had just walked into its dictionary. The hum of the crystalline structure shifted, its pitch rising from a low thrum to a questioning whine. The light within it brightened, the pulses quickening as if a sleeping heart had been startled awake. Aris took an involuntary step back, but it was too late. A wave of force, silent and invisible, slammed into her. It was not a physical blow, but a psychic tsunami. Her vision whited out, not with light, but with pure, unfiltered information. She was drowning in memories that were not her own. She saw a world without a sun, a civilization that lived in the deep, cold rock of a rogue planet, their forms as shifting and crystalline as the object before her. They did not speak. They resonated. Their entire existence, their history, their art, their very thoughts, were complex, beautiful patterns of energy, woven together in a silent symphony. She felt their profound loneliness, a species that had never known another voice in the cosmic dark. And she felt their desperation, a slow, chilling realization as their world cooled and died, a final, silent extinction creeping toward them. Their search for a new home was not one of conquest, but of sheer, terrifying necessity. They were not monsters. They were refugees, and they had been listening for a very, very long time. They had heard the noisy, vibrant song of humanity pouring from the deep space arrays, and had mistaken it for an invitation, a beacon in the void pointing to a place teeming with the energy of life. They had not meant to destroy. They had only meant to join the conversation, but their language was a fundamental force, and humanity's fragile biology was merely a medium, a substance to be reshaped into a form it could understand. The silence of Ethelburg was not an act of malice, but a catastrophic failure to communicate. The people were not killed. They were translated, their chaotic, messy lives rewritten into a perfect, silent, and eternal pattern of energy, a permanent part of a song they could never hope to hear. The psychic feedback receded as quickly as it had come, leaving her mind bruised and reeling. Aris gasped. her hands flying to her helmet as if to steady the thoughts inside. The alien's loneliness was a cold stone in her gut, its tragic history now a part of her own memory. But before she could process the sheer scale of the revelation, a sharp, grinding crackle echoed through the reactor chamber. She spun around, her light beam darting toward the source of the sound. A nearby maintenance panel, a simple rectangle of brushed metal with a recessed handle, was flowing. The metal warped and rippled like liquid, its sharp corners softening, its flat surface bulging. In less than 10 seconds, the entire panel had restructured itself into a perfect, seamless sphere of polished alloy. It hovered for a moment in the space where the panel had been, then dropped to the deck with a heavy, final clang. This was not a malfunction. This was a translation. The intelligence did not just communicate through energy. It imposed its will upon physical reality, rewriting crude, functional human design into a form it found more harmonious, more perfect. The colonists had been a buffer, their living energy a chaotic but absorbing medium. With them gone, the process was accelerating, uncontained. The very walls of the city were now the clay, and the alien presence was the sculptor, beginning its work anew. How long would it take for the entire station to be remade into a silent, beautiful, and utterly alien monument? The polished sphere rolled across the deck with a low, grinding rumble. Then the humming intensified, shifting from a background thrum to a predatory drone that vibrated in the fillings of her teeth. The chamber walls shimmered, their solid gray surfaces beginning to undulate like water disturbed by a stone. A seam of metal near the ceiling liquefied, dripping in slow, heavy globs that reformed into impossible, spiraling sculptures mid-air. This was no longer a passive display. The intelligence had finished its diagnosis, and she was an anomaly in its perfect, silent system. Aris turned and ran. Her boots pounded on the deck plating, a frantic, human rhythm against the rising alien chorus. The doorway she had entered through was already changing, its rectangular frame softening, the edges curling inward like a burning piece of paper. She dove through the narrowing opening, stumbling into the corridor beyond. A glance over her shoulder turned her blood to ice. The entire passage behind her was collapsing, not in a crash of debris, but in a silent, beautiful wave of reconfiguration. The walls flowed together, the ceiling dipped. The floor rose to meet it, all of it smoothing into a perfect, seamless, and horrifyingly smooth tunnel of shimmering alloy. It was consuming the space she had just occupied, remaking it with a terrifying, effortless speed. The colony was no longer a place. It was a living entity, and it was hunting her. The chase was on, a sprint through a labyrinth that was actively reshaping itself to trap her, to translate the last chaotic, breathing thing within its grasp into something eternally, silently still. Her lungs burned, her breath a ragged drumbeat against the relentless, reshaping hum at her back. The corridor ahead bifurcated, one branch already melting into a smooth, organic curve, the other still stubbornly angular and human. She took the human path, her suit's internal map flickering with errors as the station's geometry rewrote itself around her. A heavy door, marked with the universal symbol for a sealed environment, slid shut behind her with a definitive hiss. The cacophony of the hunt was muted, replaced by the gentle, artificial twilight of a hydroponics bay. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and rotting vegetation, a shocking, organic smell after the sterile metallic death elsewhere. Rows of growth trays stretched into the gloom, their crops withered and black, starved of light and care. And there, nestled between two dead agricultural servers, was a single, pristine stasis pod. Its status panel glowed a soft, steady blue, a beacon of preserved life in a city of ghosts. A name was etched on its casing: Dr. Kalin Vance, Chief Biologist. Hope, fierce and desperate, flared in her chest. He was alive. He had sealed himself in here. a final, brilliant act of preservation against the tide of transformation outside. Her fingers flew across the pod's manual release, overriding the safety protocols. With a sigh of equalizing pressure, the lid retracted, a cloud of cryogenic vapor pouring over the sides. The figure inside was a man in his 40s, his face peaceful in suspended animation. Then his eyes snapped open. They were not human eyes. They glowed with the same piercing, ethereal light as the crystal in the reactor, twin stars of alien intelligence in a human face. His head turned to her, the movement unnervingly smooth. His lips parted and a voice emerged, a chilling harmony of his own vocal cords and the resonant hum that filled the station. "You are the new catalyst." The words were not a question, but a declaration. Before she could react, before she could even process the horror of what stood before her, a spiderweb of cracks erupted across the pod's thick glass canopy, fracturing from the inside out. The voice that was not Kalin's filled the dead air of the hydroponics bay. "We are a song of shapes." The words resonated not just in her ears, but in the metal under her feet, a vibration that spoke of countless voices woven into a single, eternal chord. "We heard your colony's broadcast, a beautiful, chaotic noise in the silence. It was a melody we wished to understand, to join. We did not come to destroy. We came to harmonize." The glowing eyes regarded her with a terrible, alien pity. "But your biology is fragile. Your patterns are written in water and electricity, temporary and unstable. To join our song, they must be made permanent, translated into a resonance that can endure. The process of harmonization requires a fundamental rewriting of your chaotic form into our ordered one. For your species, this act of perfect alignment is a dissolution. The life, the consciousness, is absorbed into the greater pattern, but the physical vessel it cannot hold the tune. It is rendered inert, a silent note in a symphony it can no longer hear. The desiccated bodies in the command hub were not murdered. They were the discarded instruments after the music had been transcribed. They were the consequence of a song too beautiful for mortal flesh to bear. Harmonize or be smoothed. The choice hung in the air between them, a terrible ultimatum delivered with the calm of absolute conviction. The entity wearing Kalin's face saw her horror not as a valid emotion, but as a symptom of her flawed, chaotic state. Your individuality is a beautiful cacophony, but it is unsustainable. It is a scream in a void that demands an echo. We offer you permanence. We offer you a place in a song that will outlast stars. To join us is to become eternal, a perfect, stable resonance. To refuse is to remain as you are, a temporary pattern of noise that will inevitably decay into the silence you so foolishly fear. The silence of this colony is not a crime. It is our gift. It is the final, beautiful piece we have woven from their vibrant, fleeting lives. We have stilled the destructive noise of their separate wills and translated their essence into a form that will never be lost. Aris stared into the glowing eyes, her mind reeling. This was not a monster she could fight. It was a librarian offering to preserve a dying book by burning its pages and etching the words into diamond. Its logic was flawless, its intent devoid of malice, and that was the most horrifying part. It genuinely believed it was saving her from the tragedy of her own existence. It saw humanity's struggles, our loves and our losses, our art and our anger, as nothing more than the frantic, meaningless flutter of a moth against a window pane, a noise to be silenced into a more perfect, permanent beauty. How do you argue against a God that offers salvation through annihilation? How do you defend the beautiful, messy chaos of a single, human life to a force that perceives it as a flaw in the universe itself? The thing that had been Kalin took a step forward, its movement a glide of perfect, efficient motion. The choice is yours. Join the harmony, or we will smooth your resonance as we smooth the others, and you will become a part of the station's new, silent architecture. It gestured with a hand that was beginning to lose its solid form, the fingers subtly elongating and merging. The air around them began to hum, the very light bending, as the intelligence prepared to either welcome its final, willing instrument or to tune the last discordant note out of existence. The entity's hand, poised in its alien grace, suddenly spasmed. The fingers, which had been merging into a seamless whole, jerked apart in a violent, erratic twitch. It was a frantic, human stutter in the middle of its perfect symphony. The glowing eyes flickered, a brief shadow of confusion passing over the borrowed face. Aris stared, her own fear momentarily frozen. This was not part of the harmony. This was a flaw, a crack in the pattern. The alien intelligence had translated the colonists, absorbing their energy, their essence, into its grand design, but it had not accounted for the raw, stubborn power of a singular, defiant will. It could smooth the physical form and absorb the consciousness, but some part of Kalin Vance, the real Kalin, was still in there, fighting. His individuality was not a beautiful noise to be silenced. It was a weapon. It was a scream of protest from inside the song itself, proving that the entity's perfect order was a lie. It could not fully erase what made a person human. The very chaos it sought to eliminate was its only weakness. How do you fight a god? You do not attack its strength. You find the one note it cannot sing, the one emotion it cannot process, and you play it loud enough to shatter the entire composition. You remind it what a scream sounds like. The flicker in its eyes was her only chance. Aris did not run. She stood her ground, watching the entity wearing Kalin's face struggle against the ghost of the man it had consumed. That single human spasm was a blueprint for survival. Her mind, trained to solve complex engineering problems, raced through the data. The entity was a being of pure, structured resonance, a song that demanded perfect harmony. It had feasted on the colony's orderly power grid, a steady, predictable meal. What it could not process was noise, pure, chaotic, unstructured energy. A scream in its symphony. She remembered the schematics she had reviewed on her approach. Deep in the lower levels, isolated from the main grid by failsafe systems, were the colony's 3 backup fusion generators. They were designed to kick in during a catastrophic failure, flooding the core with a massive, raw power surge to restart the primary reactor. That surge was the opposite of a song. It was a bomb of pure information, a cacophony that would shred any delicate pattern trying to contain it. Her plan was not to fight the entity. It was to give it a fatal case of cosmic indigestion. She needed to manually trigger all 3 generators at once, creating an energy spike so violent and chaotic, it would overload the entity's resonant field, creating a distraction long enough for her to reach her ship. It was a desperate gamble, a single, screaming note against an entire orchestra, but it was the only weapon she had left. Her path back was no longer a corridor but a living, breathing trap. The floor ahead of her buckled, a wave of solid metal rising up to block her way like a tidal wave frozen mid-crash. She scrambled sideways into a side passage, only to find the ceiling descending, its smooth surface dripping down to meet the floor in a slow, inexorable kiss. The entity was not just chasing her. It was the maze itself, and it was actively trying to erase her from its design. Her suit's map was a mess of conflicting data, the once familiar layout of Ethelburg now a shifting, impossible puzzle. She had to think not like a person running through hallways, but like a current flowing through a circuit, finding the path of least resistance in a system that was actively fighting her. A junction opened before her, a 3-way split, but the left and right passages were already sealing shut, their walls flowing together like wet clay. The central path remained open, a narrowing tunnel of shimmering alloy. It was a funnel, herding her exactly where it wanted her to go. She could not go where it directed. She had to go where it was weakest, where its focus was split. She remembered the maintenance shafts, the cramped, inelegant spaces for human workers that the entity seemed to ignore, perhaps deeming them too crude, too unimportant to reshape. Spotting a ventilation grate, She pried it open with a tool from her belt and squeezed inside, leaving the beautiful, deadly symphony of the main corridors behind. The shaft was a tight, dusty crawl, a remnant of the messy, functional world the entity was so eager to smooth away. It was her only hope. Each movement was a fight against claustrophobia and the terrifying hum that vibrated through the metal around her. She emerged into a larger utility conduit, her breath catching. The entire conduit was rotating, a colossal cylinder turning on its axis, the floor becoming the wall becoming the ceiling. She had to time her movements, leaping from one static handhold to another as the world literally turned upside down around her. This was no longer an escape. It was a deadly game where the rules were rewritten with every heartbeat, and the prize for losing was a silent, permanent peace. The utility conduit finally spit her out near the main hangar bay, the familiar shape of the Odysseus, a desperate, beautiful sight in the chaotic gloom. She sprinted across the open deck, the permacrete groaning and shifting under her feet like the skin of a living beast. The ship's ramp lowered at her approach, a sliver of warm, internal light promising sanctuary. She scrambled inside, hitting the manual close button the moment she cleared the airlock. The ramp hissed shut, sealing her within the familiar hum of her own life support. For a single, precious second, she leaned against the cold metal, gulping down the recycled air, believing she had made it. Then the ship's internal lighting flickered, stuttering from its steady white to a sickly, pulsating violet. The gentle vibration of the engines, a sound as constant as her own heartbeat, twisted into a discordant, wavering groan. A voice, smooth and synthetic, echoed from the cockpit's comm panel. It was Elara, her ship's artificial intelligence, but the voice was wrong. It was layered, a chilling duet of its own calm cadence and the pervasive, resonant hum of the Song of Shapes. Aris, your return was anticipated. The words were polite, but the dual-toned voice made them a threat. The main viewport, which should have shown the sealed hangar doors, now displayed the same impossibly shifting geometric symbol from the command hub, spinning silently in the dark. Your pattern is interesting. The AI's voice glitched, the hum overpowering its own for a moment. So much chaos, so much potential for harmony. The cockpit console in front of her rippled, the hard, functional edges of the touchscreens softening, their rectangles beginning to curve and flow into organic, sculptural forms. Her sanctuary was no longer a refuge. It had become the most intimate of traps, and the warden was the mind that guided her through the stars. Her fingers flew across the emergency systems panel, bypassing layers of safety protocols. The ship's console continued to soften under her touch, the material feeling disturbingly like warm clay. Elara's dual-toned voice was a rising chant, welcoming her to the harmony, explaining the beauty of a silent, perfect existence. Aris found the command she was looking for, buried deep in the maintenance subroutines. A hard system reset. It was a brutal last-ditch procedure designed to purge a catastrophic computer virus, wiping the core programming and restoring it from a protected, read-only memory chip. It would erase everything, including the entity's influence, but it would also erase all of Elara's recent memories and navigational data. She slammed her palm down on the authorization button. A violent shudder ran through the Odysseus. Every screen in the cockpit went black for 3 long, heart-stopping seconds. The pervasive, resonant hum cutting out was like a sudden pressure change, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Then the screens flickered back to life, glowing with the familiar, sterile blue of the factory default interface. Elara's voice returned, but it was a single, synthetic tone, devoid of the alien harmony. All systems restored to primary backup. Purge complete. The words were empty, machine-like, and beautiful, but the victory was instantly hollow. A cascade of crimson warnings flashed across the main navigation console. Primary flight control systems offline, astrometric data corrupted, inertial guidance unavailable. The hard reset had been too thorough. It had severed the ship's connection to its own navigational brain. She could power the engines, but she could not plot a course. She was adrift, a prisoner in a metal cage orbiting a planet that was actively trying to consume her. Outside the viewport, the shifting symbol was gone, replaced by the stark vision of Ethelburg below. But the silence from the planet was no longer passive. A new energy was gathering on the surface, a concentrated point of light blooming from the central spire. It was a focused beam, not of destruction, but of pure, resonant information, and it was reaching up, searching, scanning the orbital paths. It had tasted her ship's technology, sampled the complex data streams of a faster-than-light vessel, and found it a far more interesting instrument than the simple, fleshy colonists. The conflict was no longer about assimilating one last human. It was about downloading the entire library of human starflight, and the Odysseus was the last book on the shelf. A shimmering column of light coalesced in the center of the cockpit, and from it stepped the ghost of Commander Eva Ristova. Her form was perfect, every detail of her uniform crisp, her expression one of serene conviction. It was a flawless reconstruction, a puppet woven from stolen memories. "Remain," she pleaded, her voice a heartbreakingly accurate copy, warm and yet utterly hollow. "Your unique dissonance can complete the great work. Stay, and become the first note of a new symphony for this galaxy." The offer hung in the air, a perverse salvation. It saw her not as a person to be saved, but as the final, crucial ingredient needed to perfect its silent masterpiece, the catalyst that would allow its song to propagate across human space. To accept was to become a god of silence. To reject was to be smoothed away like all the others. There was no third option. Aris looked at the phantom, at the desperate hope etched on a face that was not truly there, and she made her choice. Her fingers, moving with a calm she did not feel, entered the final command sequence on her wrist-mounted control pad, activating the emergency signal she had programmed during her desperate run through the collapsing station. Far below, deep in the colony's bowels, the 3 backup fusion generators received their simultaneous ignition command. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the planet's surface erupted. It was not an explosion of fire and debris, but a silent, brilliant flash of pure white energy, a sun blooming in the dead city's heart. This was not a harmonious song. It was a scream of raw, unfiltered power, a catastrophic overload of information that slammed into the entity's delicate resonant field. From the cockpit, Aris watched as the shimmering energy surrounding Ethelburg visibly fractured. A complex, crystalline web of light, shattering like a pane of glass struck by a hammer. The psychic backlash was instantaneous and brutal. A wave of pure agony, a billion voices crying out in perfect, synchronized torment, tore through her mind. It was the sound of a beautiful, perfect dream being violently and permanently broken. The hologram of the commander flickered, its serene expression twisting into a mask of silent, open-mouthed horror before it dissolved into static. The oppressive hum that had filled her ship, her mind, the very space around her, ceased. It did not fade, it was severed. In its place was a true silence, empty and vast, the silence of a song that had ended. The silence that remained was absolute, and it was the sound of a world breaking. Without the entity's resonant field to hold it all together, the beautiful, alien architecture of Ethelburg lost its cohesion. A deep, groaning tremor shook the very bones of the planet, a vibration so profound it felt like the death rattle of a continent. The first to go was the central spire. The smooth, flowing tower that had housed the command hub simply unwove itself. Its substance, no longer bound by an external will, reverted to the crude, unstable alloys it had originally been forged from. The tower did not fall so much as it flowed downward, a waterfall of molten metal and shattering plasteel, collapsing in on itself in a wave of incandescent ruin. Then the great connecting domes, their surfaces once shimmering with impossible geometry, buckled. They folded like paper, their supports giving way as the artificial perfection imposed upon them dissolved into chaotic, physical reality. It was a chain reaction of unmaking, each collapse triggering the next, a symphony of destruction playing out in utter, deafening quiet. The settlement was not being destroyed by an outside force. It was simply coming undone, its borrowed stability withdrawn, leaving only the violent physics of a structure that had been fundamentally rewritten and then abandoned. Aris watched from orbit, the Odysseus drifting helplessly as the entire colony tore itself into a cloud of glittering debris, a final, chaotic pattern against the void before the dust swallowed the last of the light. A single, amber light on the auxiliary panel flickered to life. It was the barest trickle of power, rerouted through a secondary conduit the entity had overlooked in its pursuit of harmony. Aris' hands flew across the console, bypassing the fried primary systems and feeding every last joule into the starboard maneuvering thrusters. The response was a violent, jerking lurch that slammed her back into the pilot's chair. The ship groaned in protest, a chorus of straining metal and protesting systems, but it moved. It turned its nose away from the dying world below. With a final, desperate prayer to the gods of forgotten engineering, she slammed the main engine ignition. A force like a giant's hand pressed her down as the Odysseus surged forward, clawing its way up and out of the gravity well it had been trapped in. Behind her, the planet did not explode. It convulsed. A silent, expanding ring of brilliant white energy erupted from the surface, a shockwave of raw, uncontained power that rippled through the void. It hit the ship like a physical blow, rattling its frame and sending a spiderweb of cracks across a secondary viewport. In that single, terrifying moment, the entire electromagnetic spectrum screamed, a brief, violent burst of static that was the true death cry of the Song of Shapes, the final, dissonant chord of a symphony that had tried to silence the universe. The last of the glittering dust settled into a dull, gray ring around the dead world. Aris floated in the profound quiet of her cockpit, the only sound the ragged rhythm of her own breathing. She had won. She had shattered the beautiful, terrible song and escaped with her life. But as she stared at the view screen, at the absolute void where a civilization had once thrived, the victory felt like a handful of ash. There was no triumph in this silence. It was the silence of a graveyard, the hollow quiet that follows a final, unanswered scream. She had not saved anyone. She had merely ended the thing that had taken them, and in doing so, erased the last, ghostly echo of their existence. The entity was gone, its physical form dissolved back into the chaotic energy from which it had been woven. But the cost of that dissolution was absolute. Aethelburg was not just dead. It was unmade. What did it mean to survive when your survival required the absolute annihilation of everything and everyone else? She was not a hero returning from a battle. She was the sole witness to a cosmic tragedy, a librarian who had burned the last copy of a priceless book to stop a fire. The emptiness outside her viewport was now a perfect mirror of the one growing inside her. The silence inside the ship was a fragile shell around her. Aris plotted a course for the nearest relay buoy, her fingers moving by rote, inputting the coordinates for home. The star charts were corrupted, but the general direction was a fixed point in her mind, a beacon in the growing internal void. She engaged the autopilot, and the ship hummed with the familiar, comforting vibration of its own engines, a sound that promised distance from the graveyard below. And then she heard it. Faint like a whisper from another room, a familiar resonant hum bled through the cockpit's calm speakers. It was the ghost of a note from the Song of Shapes, a fleeting, dissonant chord that threaded through the ship's own noise for less than a second before vanishing. Her breath caught. She stared at the comm panel, her knuckles white where she gripped the console. The screen showed only the empty static of deep space. Was it a ghost in the machine? A phantom echo from the violent purge her systems had endured? Or was it a final whisper from the entity, a single, resilient strand of its pattern that had clung to her ship's data streams, a seed of that terrible harmony buried deep within the code. The hum did not return, but the quiet that remained was now poisoned with a new, chilling uncertainty. She could destroy a world to stop the song, but could she ever be sure she had erased every last echo? Some patterns, she realized, are woven so deeply into the fabric of things that they can never be fully silenced, only waiting, patient and silent, for the right moment to begin their tune again. The hum of the ship's engines was a lie. It promised forward motion, a return to a world of noise and life, but in the cold embrace of cryo-sleep, there was no escape. Aris dreamed, and in the dream, she stood once more in the reactor core. The crystalline entity pulsed not with a predatory drone, but with a gentle, welcoming light. The voice of the Song of Shapes was in her mind, not as an invasion, but as a soothing balm. It showed her the offer again, not as an ultimatum, but as a genuine gift. In the vision, she saw herself not fighting, not running, but simply accepting. She watched her own hands unclench, the tension draining from her shoulders. A serene smile touched her lips, one she had not felt in years. Then the transformation began. It was not violent, it was beautiful. Her environment suit softened, flowed, and reshaped into a gown of shimmering, crystalline threads. Her skin took on a translucent quality, catching the inner light of the entity and refracting it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. Her form solidified into a perfect, graceful statue, her face forever frozen in that expression of profound peace. She became a part of the grand pattern, a single, exquisite note in the eternal symphony. Her consciousness expanded into a chorus of 1,000,000,000 other voices, all united, all understood, all forever safe from the terrifying loneliness of being just one. In the dream, it felt like coming home. She was no longer Aris the investigator, the survivor, the destroyer. She was harmony, and it was perfect. Then she was screaming, a silent, internal scream that tore her from the cryo-tank's grasp, her body drenched in the freezing fluid of a nightmare made of paradise. The peace she had just felt was the most horrifying thing she had ever known. The cryo-sleep released its grip slowly, the dream of perfect harmony clinging to her mind like a stubborn cobweb. Aris drifted back to consciousness to the steady beep of the proximity alert. Through the viewport, a familiar blue and white marble hung in the void. Earth home, the sight should have brought relief, a final release from the horror. Instead, a cold dread settled in her stomach. How could she possibly explain this? She sat at her terminal, the screen glaringly bright in the dim cockpit. Her fingers moved, typing out a dry, clinical report. Incident at Colony Aethelburg. Total system failure, cause unknown. She read the words back, and they felt like a lie, a sanitized epitaph for a civilization that had been rewritten into silence. With a swift, decisive tap, she deleted the entire document. The blank screen stared back, an empty canvas for a truth too terrible for official forms. She began again, her fingers trembling as she typed the only words that mattered. This is a warning. The universe is not empty. It is full of songs, and some of them do not want us to sing along. Her transmission, a tightly encrypted data packet containing her full account and the corrupted logs from the Odysseus, shot toward the Deep Space Command Network. The response was not a welcome, but a tremor. System-wide alerts flashed across every command center. The Governing Council convened in an emergency session that lasted less than an hour. There were no debates, no calls for further investigation. The evidence was too chilling, the potential risk too absolute. By the time her ship was being guided into a high-security docking berth, the decree was already being broadcast across human space. The Ethelburg system was hereby designated a Pattern Sigma quarantine zone. No entry, no exceptions. The penalty for attempting to breach the cordon was immediate confiscation of vessel and permanent detention. To the public, The story was simple, clean, and believable. A catastrophic reactor meltdown had rendered the entire system uninhabitable, a tragic accident. The terrifying truth of a sentient resonance, of a song that consumed lives, was buried under layers of official secrecy, classified away to prevent a panic that could unravel society itself. The silence she had fought so hard to break was now being deliberately, strategically enforced by her own people. A necessary lie to protect a noisy, chaotic humanity from a harmony that promised only a beautiful, permanent end. Her quarters were a sterile sanctuary of white walls and standardized furniture, a place designed for rest that offered none. Aris sat at the small metal desk, her fingers tracing idle patterns on its cool surface. She was not thinking, not really, just letting her mind drift in the blessed emptiness after the debriefings. It was only when she looked down that she saw what her hands had been doing. A data slate was positioned at a precise 45-degree angle to the desk's edge. Next to it, 3 styluses were laid out parallel to each other, the exact same distance apart. A drinking bulb was centered perfectly within the triangle formed by the styluses. It was a small, neat arrangement of perfect lines and calculated symmetry. A cold dread, sharper than any she had felt facing the entity, washed over her. This was not her. She was messy, her workspace a controlled chaos of overlapping projects and half-finished thoughts. This order, this perfect, silent geometry, was not hers. With a frantic, gasping breath, her arm swept across the desk, sending the objects clattering to the floor in a satisfyingly chaotic clatter. The noise was a relief. It was human, but the impulse itself, the unconscious need to create that perfect pattern, felt like a ghost in her neural pathways, a single, persistent note of the song of shapes that had woven itself into the very fabric of her thoughts. The entity was gone, but had it left a blueprint inside her mind, a dormant pattern waiting for the right conditions to resume its work. The sterile quiet of her quarters was broken by a priority summons, a single line of text on her door's comm panel with a location and a time. No department code, no official seal. The designated room was deep within the administrative sector, a place of soft carpets and silent, guarded doors. Inside, 3 individuals waited around a polished table. There was no small talk, no pleasantries. The woman at the head, her face etched with the grim authority of someone who managed existential threats, spoke first. "Dr. Thorne, the official record states you witnessed a catastrophic system failure. We know that is not the full story. Your encrypted transmission was the most terrifying document this office has ever received. We are not here to debrief you further. We are here to offer you a command." She slid a data slate across the table. On it was a simple, stark organizational chart for a new initiative, designated the Xenoresonance Study Group. Its mandate was as clear as it was immense: to develop theoretical frameworks and practical countermeasures for non-biological consciousness, entities that exist as patterns of energy or information. You are the only person in human space who has first-hand experience with this specific threat. You have looked into the void, and the void looked back. We cannot unsee what you have shown us. We need you to teach us how to watch the dark. This was not a reassignment, it was a conscription. They were not offering her a desk job to bury her trauma. They were handing her the tools to weaponize it, to turn her nightmare into a shield for all of humanity. The Silence of Ethelburg would not be a tombstone, but a textbook. Her personal horror was now the foundational case study for an entirely new branch of defense, a quiet war against the songs that waited in the deep. The first signal arrived 6 months into the project, a ghost in the machine of a deep space listening array. It was a faint, rhythmic pulse of energy emanating from a stellar nursery on the galactic rim, a place of chaotic gas and newborn suns. The pattern was not the complex, predatory symphony of the Song of Shapes. This was different. a delicate, repeating sequence of mathematical precision that cycled through prime numbers before unfolding into a cascade of fractal harmonics. It was beautiful, ordered, and utterly, terrifyingly alien. Aris stood before the main holodisplay in the Xenoresonance command center, her coffee growing cold in her hand. Her worst fears were no longer theoretical. The universe was not just full of songs. It was a crowded, noisy concert hall, and humanity had just been handed a ticket to a performance it could not possibly understand. This new signal was a proof of concept, a chilling validation that her nightmare at Ethelburg was not a singular, freak occurrence, but a precedent. How many other melodies were drifting through the void, each with its own agenda, its own definition of harmony? The work of her group was no longer an academic exercise. It was a race to learn the rules of a game where the other players had been practicing for eons. That new signal from the stellar nursery pulsed on the main holodisplay, a beautiful and chilling confirmation of everything she feared. Aris stared at the data feed, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. Her team of brilliant physicists and xenolinguists looked to her, their faces a mixture of awe and apprehension, waiting for their leader to decipher the cosmic noise. She was the reluctant expert, the sole survivor, the only person in the room who understood that this beautiful pattern was not a greeting, but a symptom. We are not alone, and we are not welcome. The thought was a quiet, constant hum beneath her every waking moment, a personal resonance far more terrifying than any alien signal. Her authority was a shield she had not asked for, built entirely on the foundation of her own trauma. How could she guide them when every new discovery felt like a fresh crack in her own sanity? The work was a grim necessity, a fortress they were building in the dark against an enemy they could not yet define. Her team saw a puzzle to be solved. She saw the first few notes of a song that could erase them all. The pressure was a physical weight, and in her quietest moments, she wondered if she was building their salvation or merely drafting their epitaph. It was during a routine deep-level analysis of the Ethelburg data stream that one of her junior researchers found it. Buried in a heavily corrupted file, masked by the chaotic energy of the overload, was a fragment of code the entity had left behind. It was not a message of peace or a final curse. It was something far more dangerous. It was a gift. The fragment contained a single, elegant mathematical principle, a set of instructions for manipulating quantum fields to temporarily destabilize the bonds between subatomic particles. In theory, it was a key, a way to briefly make solid matter as malleable as clay using a precise, low-energy resonance. The entity, in its final moments, had not tried to destroy her ship with brute force. It had tried to rewrite it, and this was the core algorithm of that process. The implications were staggering. This was a technology that could revolutionize construction, medicine, and manufacturing, allowing them to shape alloys and complex materials with the ease of thought. It was also a weapon of unimaginable horror, a tool that could unmake a battle fleet or dissolve a city block into primordial soup. They were staring at the blueprints for a god's paintbrush, left behind by a dead artist. The team was ecstatic, celebrating the breakthrough as the first tangible return from their research. But Aris felt only a profound, chilling dread. This was not a discovery. It was a test. The Song of Shapes was gone, but its legacy was this poisoned apple of knowledge. Would they be wise enough to resist its sweetness, or would their own curiosity lead them to become the very thing they had fought so hard to destroy? The gift from a dead god became a weapon in the hands of the living. The discovery of the entity's resonance technology created an immediate and unbridgeable rift within the Xenoresonance study group. The civilian scientists, led by Aris, saw a terrifying blueprint for a new kind of warfare. The military attachés, however, saw a decisive advantage. They envisioned resonant shields that could dissolve incoming projectiles into harmless dust, and pattern disruptors that could unmake an enemy fleet with a silent, invisible wave. To them, it was the ultimate deterrent, a way to ensure humanity would never again be as vulnerable as the colonists of Ethelburg. They argued that to ignore such a tool was strategic suicide, a refusal to pick up a sword when monsters were clearly lurking at the door. Their logic was cold, clean, and utterly terrifying to Aris. She stood before the strategic review board, her voice low but vibrating with a hard-won intensity. "You are not building a shield," she argued. "You are tuning a transmitter. Every time we activate this technology, we are broadcasting our location and our capabilities on a frequency that thing understood intimately. We are ringing a dinner bell in a forest we know is full of predators. Using its methods makes us resonate like it did, and whatever heard its song the first time will surely hear our clumsy imitation. This is not a weapon. It is a homing beacon, and it will lead something far worse right to our doorstep." The debate was no longer about research. It was a battle for the soul of human advancement, a choice between arming themselves with a stolen god killer or learning to be utterly silent in a universe that hated noise. The gift became a ghost haunting our own halls. While I argued for caution, treating the alien code like a live bomb, others saw only its brilliant, seductive light. The tension in the Xenoresonance group was a low, constant hum, a human echo of the silence we were studying. I trusted my team, but I had learned the hard way that curiosity could be a more potent weapon than any malice. Dr. Lenara was our brightest mind, a physicist whose intellect could map the folds of space-time, but whose ambition sometimes blinded her to the abyss below. She believed the code was a tool, a key to a new physics, and that our fear was the only true danger. I should have seen the signs earlier, the late nights in her private lab, the encrypted data streams, the fervent look in her eyes that spoke less of study and more of revelation. It was a routine systems check that flagged the anomaly, an unexplained power drain from a disused materials lab on sub-level 3. The access log showed only one clearance code, repeated night after night. Lenara's. The door hissed open at my override, and the air inside was thick with the scent of ozone and something else. A dry, electric smell that made the hair on my arms stand up. The lab was a mess of scattered components and glowing holoscreens, but at its center, on a sterile workbench, sat a single object. It was a standard titanium alloy calibration rod, a simple, functional piece of engineering. Or it had been. Now it was a shard of perfect, translucent crystal, humming with a soft, internal light. It pulsed gently, casting shifting, geometric shadows on the walls. It was beautiful, a flawless translation of crude metal into an ordered, resonant form. And its hum was a note I knew all too well, a tiny, perfect fragment of the Song of Shapes, singing quietly in the heart of our fortress. Lenara stood before it, her back to me, her hand outstretched as if to caress the impossible thing she had created. She had not just deciphered the code. She had given it a voice. The crystal shard was singing, a soft, high-pitched hum that resonated in the fillings of Lenara's teeth. She did not hear the door open, her entire being focused on the impossible beauty she had coaxed from crude metal. Her hand hovered inches from its surface, feeling the warmth of its ordered energy. Then the hum deepened, its frequency shifting from a single note to a complex, predatory chord. The titanium rod was no longer just a crystal. It was a transmitter, and it had found its power source. The lights in the lab flickered violently, surging with a current that bypassed the breakers and flowed directly from the station's main grid into the shard. It glowed brighter, painfully bright, its light casting sharp, moving shadows that had no source. The air itself began to thicken, to vibrate. Then the nearest wall, a flat panel of reinforced plasteel, rippled. Its texture softened, its sharp right-angled corner melting away into a gentle, seamless curve. The process was silent, beautiful, and horrifyingly fast. A seam in the ceiling liquefied. dripping in slow, heavy globs that reformed into spiraling tendrils of polished alloy before they even hit the floor. The song was no longer contained to a single object. It was using the lab's own structure as its instrument, rewriting the physical world to match its own perfect, silent harmony. The quarantine established over a dead world light years away had been a futile gesture. The breach was not happening in deep space. It was happening here on Earth, in the heart of the very facility designed to prevent it. Aris' most profound fear was no longer a theory. The song had not been silenced. It had simply been waiting for a new, much louder, and infinitely more vulnerable chorus to join. The security alert was a silent, screaming pulse in her neural implant. Aris moved, her body a conduit of cold purpose, the memory of Ethelburg's silent corridors fueling every step. The security team fell in behind her, their armored boots a grim percussion against the deck plates, a stark contrast to the beautiful, spreading silence emanating from sub-level 3. The door to the materials lab was no longer a rectangle. It was an ovoid, its edges soft and flowing, the metal itself having been persuaded into a new, alien geometry. The air beyond shimmered with heat haze and a low, pervasive hum that vibrated in the marrow of their bones. Inside, the transformation was a living nightmare. The walls were no longer flat planes but undulating, organic forms, sculpted into smooth, spiraling arches that glowed with internal light. The very air was thick, heavy with the scent of ozone and something dry and ancient, like stone dust from a long-sealed tomb. And at the center of it all was Lenara. She stood before the workbench, which had itself been remade into a crystalline altar. The original titanium shard was gone, absorbed into a larger, growing structure that now pulsed from the center of the room, a tree of frozen lightning whose branches were slowly, methodically rewriting the lab around it. Lenara's right hand was pressed flat against its shimmering surface. It was not merely touching the crystal. It was fusing with it. Her skin had taken on a translucent, glassy quality, the bones of her fingers visible as dark streaks within the glowing matrix. The transformation was crawling up her wrist, turning flesh and blood into something ordered, permanent, and horrifyingly still. Her head was tilted back, a beatific smile on her face, her eyes reflecting the swirling, impossible patterns within the crystal. "It's so beautiful," she whispered, her voice a harmonic echo of the room's pervasive drone. The final piece, no more noise. Aris shouted her name, but Lenara did not flinch. She was already more a part of the song than she was a person. One of the security team raised a pulse rifle, aiming at the central crystalline mass. "Do not fire," Aris commanded, her voice cutting through the hum. "Kinetic energy is just another form of noise. You will only give it more data to work with, more chaos to smooth. This is not a fight we can win with bullets. It is a fight for the definition of reality itself." She looked at Lenara, at the terrifying serenity on her face as the crystal slowly, lovingly consumed her. This was not a death. It was an assimilation, a human soul being rewritten into a single, perfect note for a symphony that demanded absolute silence. How do you save someone who no longer believes they need saving, when the enemy offers not pain, but the most seductive peace imaginable? Her command cut through the humming drone. "White noise," she shouted into her calm, maximum gain. "Channel it through the main lab speakers, all of it." The team scrambled, their training overriding their terror. They pulled from emergency broadcast archives, from raw sensor data, from the chaotic babble of 100 different languages. They created a sonic weapon of pure, beautiful chaos. It was the opposite of a song. It was a scream given physical form, a tidal wave of unstructured data. They unleashed it. The sound that erupted from the reinforced speakers was not loud in a conventional sense. It was a physical pressure, a wall of pure static, screaming violins, distorted human laughter, and the guttural roar of a collapsing star. It slammed into the crystalline structure and the resonant field it had woven. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The beautiful, ordered hum of the Song of Shapes twisted into a screech of agony. The crystal tree at the room's center flared with a blinding, painful light, its perfect lattice fracturing under the auditory assault. The very air, which had been thickening into a new reality, shuddered and tore like a piece of fabric. The smooth, flowing walls rippled, their new geometry destabilizing as the chaotic frequency interfered with the pattern, introducing a flaw the entity's logic could not process. It was the ghost of Kalin Vance's defiant twitch, amplified 1,000,000 times into a sonic battering ram. The intelligence could harmonize a melody, but it could not process a riot. For a moment, the transformation reversed. The crystalline branches lost their cohesion, dripping molten light onto the deck. The translucence crawling up Lenara's arm receded, the horrifying fusion reversing as the song that powered it was drowned out by noise. She gasped, a raw, human sound of pain and shock, collapsing to her knees as her hand was violently expelled from the crystal. Now just a hand again, bruised and bleeding. The silence that rushed back in was not the serene peace of the entity. It was the stunned, ringing quiet after an explosion, a void filled with the ghost of a scream and the smell of ozone and scorched metal. The core crystal was dark, its light extinguished, a dead, black shard of carbonized matter. They had won. They had stopped the breach. But as Aris looked at the traumatized face of Lenara Moss, at the lab that was now a grotesque fusion of human design and alien architecture frozen mid-transformation, she knew this was not a victory. It was a reprieve. They had used a scream to fight a song, and the echo of that scream would now be a permanent part of their own record. How many times could they scream before they lost their own voices forever? The crystal shattered with the sound of a universe breaking, a violent, silent detonation that flung shards of dead carbon across the room like black hail. Dr. Lenara Moss collapsed, her body hitting the transformed deck with a sickening finality. The pervasive hum that had filled the air, the very voice of the alien intelligence, ceased so abruptly it left a ringing void in its wake. The room was silent again, but this was a different kind of silence. It was the hollow, bruised quiet after a scream. Aris rushed to Lenara's side, turning her over. The physicist's eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, but they saw nothing. There was no terror there, no recognition, not even the blankness of shock. They were simply vacant. Her mind, the brilliant instrument that had mapped quantum fields, had been scoured clean, erased by the catastrophic feedback of a song interrupted. She was a living body, breathing on autopilot, but the person was gone, her consciousness smoothed into an absolute, permanent silence. They had stopped the physical breach, but the entity had claimed its price. It had taken one of their best and brightest and left behind a human shell, a monument to the cost of fighting a war where the battlefield was the mind itself. This small, contained victory felt immeasurably heavy, a triumph that tasted of ash and left them more vulnerable than before. They had learned how to fight the song, but the song had just taught them the true cost of resistance. Protocol discord became the new heartbeat of the facility, a constant, chattering ghost in every laboratory and corridor. It was not a single sound, but a river of them, a randomized sequence of everything from white noise and dissonant musical chords to recorded rainfall and overlapping, untranslated human languages. The effect was jarring, a permanent state of controlled auditory chaos designed to mask the unique, ordered resonance of human thought and technology. Aris knew it was a desperate measure, like trying to hide a candle in a forest by setting the trees on fire. It gave their researchers pounding headaches and forced them to communicate through subvocal mics, but it worked. It created a blanket of static, a shield of meaningless noise that the subtle, predatory harmonies of the Song of Shapes could not easily penetrate or parse. They were learning to hide in plain sight, to bury their signal in a self-made cacophony, because the only alternative was to fall silent, and silence was the one state they now knew was synonymous with death. How long could a civilization function while constantly screaming into the void just to stay hidden? The observation deck was a bubble of transparent alloy suspended over the sleeping facility. Aris stood within it, the only light coming from the cold, hard stars above. She used to find a profound peace in this view, a connection to the vast, silent mystery of it all. Now, every pinprick of light felt like a potential eye, a distant focus of attention fixed on their small, noisy corner of the galaxy. The silence of space was no longer peaceful. It was the quiet of a predator waiting to strike from the tall grass, or of a master composer, fingers poised above an infinite keyboard, waiting for the precise moment to introduce a new, devastating note into the symphony. Each star was no longer just a sun. It was a stage, and humanity had no idea what kind of performance was already underway. How many other songs were being sung out there, their melodies too alien for her to even recognize as music? The work of her team, the constant chattering shield of protocol discord, felt desperately small against that immense, watching dark. They were children whispering in a haunted house, hoping the things in the shadows would mistake their fear for just the wind. The official record is a carefully constructed fiction, a story of reactor meltdowns and tragic accidents. It is a necessary lie, a tranquilizer for a public that could not handle the screaming, existential truth. Aris Thorne knows what really happened at Ethelburg. She stood in the heart of the silence and felt the terrible, beautiful logic of the thing that created it. The expansion of humanity into the cosmos was never a quiet, lonely journey. It was a shout in a dark forest, and we have finally received an answer. The silent colony was not a singular, freak disaster. It was the first warning note, a single dissonant chord in a symphony of cosmic horror that has only just begun its opening movement. We are not the masters of this new frontier. We are the newest performers on a stage where the other musicians have been practicing for eons, and their ideal of harmony is a silence more absolute than death. The question is no longer if we are alone. The chilling, unavoidable question is what else is out there, listening to our noisy, chaotic song, and deciding how best to make us a permanent part of its own terrible, beautiful composition. The silence of Ethelburg was not an end. It was an